Part 45. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 449. Ning Chui has always been keen. When he was helping Ling Chu breathe in the pool under the waterfall, he noticed that there seemed to be something abnormal about his body. But he was in danger of drowning at that time, so he didn't think much about it. I just thought that I liked Ling Chu, so it was inevitable that I would be a little distracted when I was giving her qi. So the inexplicable restlessness in his heart was suppressed by him subconsciously. But at this moment, under Ling Chu's provocation, the restlessness in his heart suddenly burst out. When he came to consciousness, he had already put one arm around Ling Chu's slim waist and the other hand on the back of her head. Hold each other tightly, their hearts beating fiercely, their noses touching, and the gentle kiss quickly turned into a plunder full of lust. There was a string in Ling Chu's mind that was broken. Her body was shaking even more violently. She pressed tightly against Ning Chui's lean waist, and even through a piece of clothing, she could feel the outline of the other person. The two bodies were wetly pressed against each other, and their posture was extremely ambiguous. The longing in Ling Chu's heart was screaming crazily, gnawing at her sanity quickly. It is about to overwhelm her last line of defense. A long kiss not only did not relieve the thirst in her heart, but made her more greedy. She wanted far more than this. Ling Chu had already forgotten everything in his mind at this moment, and all he could see in his mind was Ning Chui's handsome face with sharp but charming features. "Sir," she whispered with blurry eyes and flushed cheeks, while twisting and grinding. At the same time, he reached out impatiently with both hands to pull the clothes on Ning Chui's body. Ning Chui's eyes were red, and there was an indescribable desire in his eyes, and he wanted to eat the person in his arms. Just when Ling Chu pulled off his collar, a cold wind blew, and his chest suddenly felt cold. Ning Chui was suddenly startled. The disappearing sanity suddenly popped up in his mind, reminding him how despicable his behavior was at this moment. He knew that he should quickly move away from the beautiful woman in his arms at this moment. However, his body failed to keep up with his reason. Seeing that Ling Chu was still pulling at his clothes, he could only quickly free up one hand and grab her arms tightly. Hands were grabbed, Ling Chu couldn't move, and his body twisted unbearably. He looked up at Ning Chui with dissatisfaction in his eyes. Ling Chu didn't know how tempting he was at this moment. She was almost hanging on Ning Chui's body, her toes wrapped around his lower back, curling up unbearably in the friction. His usually pale face was now extremely gorgeous, his eyes were as charming as silk, and tiny moans escaped from his throat. Like a soul-stirring tune, it rushes into Ning Chui's ears. Ning Chui was breathing heavily, with strong and ferocious desire in his gloomy eyes, like a hunting beast, surging with animal nature. Reasons are torn apart and strangled in stopping and continuing. Soon, his forehead was covered with beads of sweat. I don't know how long it took, but reason finally prevailed. He took another deep breath, closed his eyes tightly, and suppressed the desire in his heart. He lowered his eyes and said hoarsely, "Chu, don't move." However, at this moment, Ling Chu had no sense at all, he only knew that he desperately wanted to relieve his inner desire. Still twisting and grinding dissatisfied, Ning Chui took a deep breath and looked away from her face cruelly. Hold her to the shore. Having never been able to get what he wanted, Ling Chu's initial dissatisfaction gradually turned into pleading. "Sir, I want, give it to me quickly, okay?" These soft and gentle pleas made the blood all over Ning Chui's body burn. Yet he knew there was nothing he could do. "I can only force myself to turn a deaf ear, grit my teeth, and continue to swim hard. Sir, I feel uncomfortable, please help me, okay?" In a low voice, "It's so charming that it kills you. The red lips are so delicate and charming, and the squeaking sound is like a gossamer, all of which are life-threatening curses." Ning Chui shivered, veins popped out on his forehead, and the surging animal nature almost made him tear through his clothes and grab the soft white rabbit in his hand. Inhale, exhale. Inhale again and exhale again. But Ling Chu didn't know that he had to endure it extremely hard and never got what he wanted. She only knew that she was about to explode, twisting wildly. Ning Chui groaned. Although he was soaking in the cold winter water, there were large beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. Just when he couldn't help but take action, he closed his eyes and opened them, took 2 quick breaths, and slowly stopped swimming. Hand held Ling Chu with his left arm, and pulled out the half-broken dagger with his right hand. A flip. Stab oneself in the thigh. Soon, the clear river water spread into a blood-red color. Perhaps it was the smell of blood that drifted into his nose that made Ling Chu regain some sense. She stopped twisting. As soon as I lowered my head following the smell of blood, I saw a piece of bright red river water. Ning Chui calmly retracted the dagger, but his action happened to fall into the eyes of Ling Chu, who was lowering his head. She glanced at the river blankly, and the color on her face quickly faded. Although his sanity has returned a little, the desire has not subsided at all. Ling Chu secretly bit the tip of his tongue, slowly raised his head and looked at Ning Chui. He said hoarsely, "Sir, knock me out." Ning Chui pursed her lips and said nothing. Ling Chu's eyes fell firmly on his thin lips. Just when she couldn't help but kiss him again, she closed her eyes. After opening it, he begged, "Sir, please knock me out." She spoke slowly and hard, word by word. Ning Chui felt soft in her heart. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "Okay." After finishing speaking, he raised his hand and pressed the back of her neck. Ling Chu felt relieved and fell into a dark and sweet dream. Ning Chui tightened her arms, pushed aside the hair scattered on her face, and took one last longing look before looking away. After swimming for another half an hour, Ning Chui finally found a gentle area, held Ling Chu close to the shore, and finally carried her to the shore. After tapping Ling Chu's sleeping point, Ning Chui also calmed down. "I have carefully reviewed everything that happened along the way since I left Beijing." Although he and Ling Chu inevitably had skin-to-skin contact after falling into the water, neither he nor she were frivolous people. Ordinarily, even if they were happy with each other, they would refrain from receiving gifts and not go too far. However, due to the entanglement in the water, both of them lost their sense of proportion. This is obviously not normal. Various symptoms indicate that they are like taking a love potion. But Ning Chui recalled what happened along the way and found no signs that they had been addicted to beauty drugs. Even before he jumped off the cliff, there was nothing wrong with him. If there was anything unusual, it was that when he sank into the pool, there was a moment when his right shoulder seemed to feel a slight pain. Looking back now, it feels like I was bitten by something. It was just that the pain was insignificant to him, and since he was facing drowning at the time, he just thought it was a wound scratched by a branch when he fell off the cliff, and didn't pay attention to it. But if they were bitten by something in the water, it would be like they had been given a love potion, but Ning Chui had never heard of anything biting people that could cause such symptoms. Ning Chui turned his head. The wound was on his right shoulder and could not be seen at all. Looking back at Ling Chu, he saw that she was sleeping and her face turned red again. His pretty eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if he was extremely uncomfortable. Ning Chu Yujun's face was full of worry. He raised his head and looked around. "For the current plan, you must first find a safe place to stay and then make plans. Thanks to Ivico Iwit, 1402121840214228, Panax Noto Ginseng. DB, Yan, Sihide, 641,417, 0808292220201007, Xianbin, .v, Silent Blessing, Yun All Living Beings, Why We Grow Old, Fankishan, China Fuse, Wabk. 123, Prose. B.A., Eden of the East, 2023052174210, Crystal at Diamond, CHLWCH, 140212184021428, 20221201005245245118, 641,417, Dao. EB and other book friends recommend and vote for support. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. Thanks to 202212010052452118, Ivico Amazi and other book friends for their warm comfort and blessings. Love you guys. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 451. They were rushed to an unknown place. The forest was deep and lush, the weather was gloomy and it seemed like it was about to rain, and the roars of wild beasts could be heard faintly in the distance. Ning Chui identified the direction, tightened her arms, hugged the sleeping Ling Chu and walked forward. There is no road underfoot, and everywhere we pass are either piles of rocks or dead branches and leaves that sink into our calves, making it difficult to walk. As he walked, he looked carefully. Look for a place to stay, and be prepared for wild beasts to suddenly appear and attack you. After walking for nearly 3/4 of an hour, I found a long, narrow, and steep path leading to an unknown place. The cold wind was blowing, and he was wearing soaked clothes. It was probably cold, so Ling Chu subconsciously shrank into Ning Chui's generous arms. Ning Chui lowered his eyes, looked up again, and walked towards the path. The path is winding, and the further in you go, the more difficult it becomes. But Ning Chui never thought of giving up Ling Chu in her arms. His brows were silent and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead, but he always held her firmly forward. Finally, after walking about 3 miles, I found a cave halfway up the mountain. He quickened his pace and walked to the entrance of the cave. He did not walk in hastily. First he picked up a small stone with his toes, caught it with one hand, and with a little effort, threw it into the cave. Listen carefully. After a thud came from the cave, there was no other movement. After waiting quietly for a while, I didn't hear anything unusual. At this point, I breathed a sigh of relief. Luckily, there doesn't seem to be any wild animals in this cave. But he still did not let down his guard and carefully carried Ling Chu inside. The entrance to the cave is narrow and a little dark. But the further you go in, the more spacious it becomes. What surprised Ning Chui was that this turned out to be a hole within a hole. Walking along, a breeze blew by, and a thin light shone down from the small hole at the top of the stone wall, spreading on the dry ground. Going a dozen steps further to the other side, there is actually a natural stone window about 7 or 8 inches tall on the stone wall, with a lush green mountain outside. Looking around carefully, I didn't find anything wrong. The hanging heart finally fell. Choose a clean place, bend down and gently put Ling Chu down. He raised his hand and took off his cloak, walked to one side to wring out the water on it, then walked back and spread it on the ground. Hold up Ling Chu with both arms, lay him down on the cloak, and then quickly walked out of the cave. Ling Chu was still sleeping, and Ning Chui did not dare to go far. He collected 2 bundles of dry firewood and a pile of dead leaves to ignite the fire nearby. After carrying him back to the cave, he saw Ling Chu curled up in a ball and sleeping. He was busy setting up firewood and lighting it. He then built a rack with branches and put his coat on it to bake. Looking back, he saw that Ling Chu was all wet. He walked up and called out a few times. Ling Chu didn't react at all. Her body bones were already weak, and she had been soaked in water for so long in the cold winter months. If she was allowed to wear soaked clothes all the time, she might become seriously ill. Although I don't want to offend her, there is no cure here, and I don't know how long it will take to get out of this forest. In case that weak body cannot hold on. He hesitated for a moment, then finally raised his hand to take off her outer garment and put it on a wooden rack to bake. He glanced sideways and hurried out again. He quickly moved a few large rocks and blocked the entrance of the cave, and also dragged some branches to cover it. Looking around, he found nothing unusual and then walked towards the place he had previously favored. I shot 2 pheasants as fast as I could. After I found the stream water and cleaned it, I also found a sunken stone trough, filled some stream water, and took it back along the original route. Moved branches and boulders away, and after entering, blocked the entrance from the inside to prevent wild animals from breaking in. Back in the cave, Ling Chu was still asleep. I touched my forehead, but fortunately there was no fever. Afraid that she would be cold, he added 2 more firewood to the fire, built another shelf with branches, and put the skewered pheasant on it to roast. As the chicken fat dripped onto the fire, an alluring fragrance spread out in the cave, and the chicken soup boiling in the stone trough slowly began to boil. Not long after, a dull thunder exploded outside the cave, followed by the patter of rain, and icy raindrops drifted in from the stone window along with the cold wind. Ning Chui I walked over to check and saw that there were not many raindrops coming in, and it had no impact on Ling Chu and the fire, so he felt relieved. As soon as I turned around, I heard a subtle squeak. Ling Chu opened his eyes in a daze and heard a soft voice asking, "I'm awake, are you feeling uncomfortable? Very thirsty?" I answered subconsciously and found myself lying down, trying to sit up. Ning Chui I reached out and gave him a hand. Ling Chu was about to say thank you, but when he saw his handsome face, the memories before he fainted suddenly flooded into his mind. Thinking of the entanglement with Lord Ning in the river and the wolfish words he said, Ling Chu's face suddenly turned red, and he was so embarrassed that he wanted to dig a hole in the ground. Her reputation was completely ruined. Seeing her long eyelashes flapping like a fan and her eyes panicked, Ning Chui I knew that she must have remembered her previous memory. Afraid of her embarrassment, he said nothing, turned back to the fire as if nothing had happened, and brought the stone trough along with the chicken soup in it. He then used a bowl-like stone to scoop out the chicken soup and the chicken from the stone trough, and put them into another stone bowl. He also took a pair of chopsticks cut from a tree branch and handed them to Ling Chu. In the wilderness, conditions are limited, so we can only make do with some. Seeing that Ning Chui I didn't mention the previous incident, Ling Chu secretly breathed a sigh of relief and suppressed his shyness and embarrassment. Trying to put on a calm expression, he reached out and took the chicken soup and chopsticks. "My lord, you must be humble. It is extremely rare for you to have roast chicken and chicken soup in this wilderness. If it weren't for you, I would have to chew the bark and eat the leaves." I don't know whether Ning Chui I thought this incident was nothing, or was worried that she would think of the previous incident, so she didn't say anything more. He just let Ling Chu drink chicken soup and gave her a piece of roast chicken. After she had eaten and drank enough, she silently and quickly disposed of the rest. Finally, he brought over the dried outer clothes. "The clothes you are wearing are still wet. You must change them and dry them to avoid getting cold and getting sick. I'll go and guard the entrance of the cave. If anything happens, just call." Ling Chu looked at his back as he walked away silently, knowing that he was avoiding suspicion, and told her to stay at the entrance of the cave so that she would not be afraid and feel at ease. Wearing wet clothes is indeed uncomfortable, and Ling Chu is also afraid of catching wind and cold. Quickly took off his middle coat, put on his outer clothes, and put them together with Ning Chui's coat on the wooden rack to bake. Then he raised his voice and said, "Sir, I have changed. Please take off your wet clothes and dry them." "No, my clothes are almost dry." "If you are weak, put on my outer clothes to avoid catching cold." "How can that be done?" It was the 12th month of winter, and he had injuries on his body. He had been soaked in cold water for a long time, just in case he was also sick. "Who will take her out of this uninhabited virgin forest?" Ling Chu walked out of the cave and insisted that Ning Chui also change out of his wet clothes. It was windy outside the cave. She was shivering from the cold and even sneezed. Ning Chui had no choice but to walk back into the cave and change her clothes. Two people sat by the fire and warmed themselves up silently. Thanks for the support of Wenki 666 monthly votes. Thanks to Ixixi, Woohoo Dash, Yan, Happy Life, Morning Glory Under the Scorching Sun, The Song of the Goat and the Story of the Eyes, Panax Noto Ginseng. DB, Chen, 2023052174210, Xianbin, Crystal at Diamond.v, All Living Beings, China Rich ZE, Happy Baby, Why We Grow Old, CHLWCH, Fallen Leaves No Autumn. Ad, Tao Yao. EB, Colorful Life, Ixixi.v, Xianbin, Why We Grow Old, China Fuse, Curcuma, Silly and Harshai, All Living Beings, Tao Yao. EB, Free as the Wind 459, Goat Song and the Story of the Eyes, CHLWCH, Chen, Prose. BA, Colorful Life, Habits Are You and Other Book Friends Recommend and Vote for Support. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. I went to the hospital to get the results today, and the doctor prescribed Western medicine and 14 large bags of Chinese medicine. I couldn't help but shudder when I thought about having to drink Chinese medicine twice a day for the next 2 weeks instead of asking for votes today. I want to ask for some blessings. Everyone wishes me that after taking this medicine, I will never have to go to the hospital every 3 days again. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 452. The two of them were silent for a moment. Maybe it was due to the fire, but Ling Chu gradually felt that his mouth was dry and his body was getting hotter and hotter. He couldn't help but frown. Moved back quietly, farther away from the fire. In order to divert her attention, she suddenly turned her head, looked at Ning Chui aside, and asked what she had been holding back in her heart for a long time. Why did you fall off the cliff? Ning Chui was stirring the fire with a branch. The light of the fire reflected on his face, like a layer of warm light. Hearing Ling Chu's words, he paused in his hands and looked up. I promised King Dingyuan that I will protect you. Ling Chu looked at him in disbelief. Even if you promised my father, you wouldn't have to go to such an extent, right? The cliff is so high, you haven't thought about what might happen if you miss it. She looked in disbelief. Ning Chui glanced at her and opened her thin lips. There is a more important reason, for you. Seeing her dazed expression, Ning Chui curled up her lips and said softly, Fool, I said, I am happy with you. Since you are in danger, how can I not save you until you die? He spoke in a normal and indifferent tone, as if he was saying that the weather is nice today. However, Ling Chu's heart palpitated. Ning Chui did say that he liked her, but she never thought that he would go so far for her, even risking his life. Have you never thought about how devastated your parents would be if something happened to you? Ning Chui smiled and said nothing. Seeing Ling Chu being knocked off the cliff by the man in grey, he had no time to think of anything else and jumped off instinctively. Although something as crazy as jumping off a cliff is not something he would be able to do. But Ning Chui had no regrets. What do I have that deserves to be sacrificed to save my life? Ning Chui stared at her quietly, with a serious expression. There is nothing worthwhile about being happy with someone. I only know that if I don't save you, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Seeing her sitting in front of him alive, Ning Chui was extremely glad that he jumped off the cliff without any hesitation. Otherwise, he really couldn't imagine the tragic situation of her falling from such a high place. There are no sweet words or vows of eternal love. However, Ling Chu was filled with emotion. It was quiet in the cave. The two did not speak, only looked at each other quietly. I don't know if it's because the shining black eyes are too focused or because the firelight is too hot. Or perhaps in her mind, Ning Chui was too impressed by him jumping off the cliff. Ling Chu suddenly felt a little dry in his mouth. There is still some itching behind my right shoulder. Ling Chu originally thought that it would be over if he endured it for a while. Unexpectedly, the more she endured it, the more itchy she became. I turned around to take a look, but couldn't see it at all. She could only reach out and scratch it. Unexpectedly, this scratching not only failed to relieve the itching, she even felt that the previous feeling of thirst came back. Ling Chu secretly thought that it was not good. She did not want to court Ning Chui like a dissatisfied brothel girl like before. But she didn't know what happened to her, and she couldn't see what happened next. In my anxiety, I felt itchy all over my body. Ning Chui noticed something strange about her, and upon closer inspection, he found that her face was shy and unbearably nervous, and her cheeks were flushed. A pair of beautiful eyes are like spring water, feeling aggrieved and intolerable. But it's uncomfortable, the itching was really unbearable. Ling Chu ignored his shyness and pretended to be calm. My back is itchy, but I can't see it. Could you please help me take a look? Seeing her constantly scratching her right shoulder blade, Ning Chui suddenly remembered the strangeness of her left shoulder blade, and suddenly felt itchy on her body. Seeing him frowning and saying nothing, Ling Chu endured his anxiety and asked with side eyes, "Sir?" Okay, seeing how uncomfortable she was, Ning Chui didn't care about the defense between men and women. Hearing his agreement, Ling Chu turned around, loosened his collar, and pulled his clothes back. Seeing the exposed fragrant shoulders, a surge of anxiety rushed from Ning Chui's belly to his mind, instantly making his mouth feel dry. He subconsciously looked away. Ling Chu couldn't hear the sound and said again, "Sir, why don't you help me quickly and find out what's going on?" I waited for a long time without a response. The anxiety in my heart was mixed with the itching on my body, which was obviously an urging of dissatisfaction. But for some reason, the words coming out of his mouth were filled with a hint of coquettishness. When Ling Chu heard his own voice, he was startled at first, and then felt a sense of embarrassment. She suddenly turned her head and regardless of what Ning Chui thought, she reached out and took his slender hand and put it on her exposed back. She originally wanted Ning Chui to check her, but his slightly cool palm fell on the hot skin, making Ling Chu squeak uncontrollably. She took a breath and closed her eyes. She wanted to take Ning Chui's hands away from her, but her hands seemed to have their own minds. Not only did he not let go, he held on tightly. She felt extremely comfortable when the skin touched each other, so she subconsciously used Ning Chui's hand to help scratch it. She felt comfortable, but she didn't know how tempting her actions were to Ning Chui. Ling Chu's skin was like fine white jade, with a faint layer of light pink under the warm light of the firewood. People can't help but want to take off all the unsightly clothes, so that they can hold her in their arms and cherish her. Ling Chu originally thought that using Ning Chui's hands relieved the itching on his back, and that other parts of his body would also be relieved. But she soon discovered that was not the case. The more she scratched, the more the thirst in her heart was brought out. She couldn't help but want to use his hands to scratch her whole body to relieve the itch. But if she did this, who would she become? Ling Chu still had a trace of reason left in his mind, and he tried his best to suppress the thought. However, her patience was in vain. "My heart is anxious and anxious." The grievance came up, and the ends of his eyes were slightly red. There were tears in his eyes, but he tried his best not to let them fall. With such a look on her face and the unbearable moaning in her mouth, Ning Chui just took one look at her, and her Adam's apple rolled up and down, and her dark pupils were hard to distinguish. Afraid that he would do something irreparable, Ning Chui took a few deep breaths, suppressed the thoughts in his mind, and his eyes fell on the row of small tooth marks on Ling Chu's back shoulder blades. If he guessed correctly, there should be the same tooth mark on his left shoulder. It seems that they were bitten by unknown things when they fell into the pool under the waterfall. Ning Chui was still frowning and thinking. The more Ling Chu endured it, the more he felt like there were millions of ants crawling on his body. She wanted Ning Chui to knock her out again, but her words somehow turned into a soft and touching plea. "Sir, I feel uncomfortable, please help me." "How do you want me to help you?" Ning Chui said subconsciously. As soon as the words left his mouth, Ling Chu suddenly turned around, threw himself into his arms and rubbed him impatiently. As if this could not relieve the itching on her body, she eagerly grabbed his hand. "Put it on the big round and trembling soft ball on your body, sir, there are ants on me, please help me. Ask for the counting votes. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times." Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 453. Touching the trembling softness, Ning Chui came back to her senses instantly. "It's like touching a hot potato, hurriedly trying to take back your hand." Ling Chu noticed his movement and immediately held the back of his hand dissatisfied. Afraid that he would pull his hand away, she even pressed harder. One wants to take it away, and the other is reluctant to give it up. The soft body swayed with an alluring white light while struggling. Ling Chu couldn't help but let out a choking sound in his throat. Ning Chui's eyes suddenly turned red and she was breathing heavily. Worried that struggling vigorously might hurt her, Ning Chui had to suppress the raging thirst in her heart. "Chu, there are no ants on you, please let go." "It's obvious, but you're lying," Ling Chu immediately retorted in a dissatisfied voice. Like an unreasonable person, looking aggrieved, anxious and annoyed at the same time. Ling Chu's consciousness was drifting. She felt that she was not herself at the moment, as if she was possessed by some ghost. Now she couldn't think, she only had the thought of desperately quenching her thirst. Just stick to Ning Chui tightly, rub it up and down to relieve the itch, and gasp lowly in the mouth. After a few times, he suddenly let go of his hand. But she didn't want Ning Chui to leave. Instead, he stood on tiptoes dissatisfied, put his hands on his tight shoulders, then wrapped them up and pulled them down. The two phases are close to each other. Lingering and pathos. Ning Chui was already in his prime of life, and as he was eroded by the poison of charm, his self-control was already on the verge of breaking out. At this moment, Ling Chu's emotions were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Ning Chui's thirst, which she endured with all her might, finally surged out like water from a lake bursting its banks. Swamped what little sanity he had left. Hands hugged each other tightly unconsciously. Pressed onto the cloak on the ground. Ling Chu's consciousness had long since faded away, leaving only instinctive movements and low breathing. From time to time, an unbearable moan came from my throat. Her voice is not loud, thin, and soft, like a young rabbit lying helplessly on the cloak, which makes people pity and is extremely attractive. "Sir, I'm so itchy, please help me." Ling Chu, under the influence of charming poison, felt that Ning Chui's clothes were too obstructive. She begged passionately while eagerly tugging at his clothes. Just after baking, Ning Chui changed out of his middle coat and was only wearing an outer coat. Under Ling Chu's violent pull, the outer garment suddenly loosened, revealing his tight and muscular chest. As if by magic, Ling Chu's eyes were firmly fixed on him. From his Adam's apple down, to his collarbone, and then to the smooth mermaid line on his lower abdomen. Ling Chu swallowed, as if he couldn't wait to enjoy some delicious food. Hands out together. Ning Chui's body was suddenly brought out with series of brilliant sparks. His eyes were red, his hands were firmly on the cloak, and beads of sweat were rolling down his forehead. Just when Ning Chui couldn't help but want to eat the rabbit in front of her. A burst of thunder rolled past outside the cave, and a cold wind drifted in from the stone window. Ning Chui suddenly stiffened. A ray of consciousness suddenly broke into his mind. The redness in his eyes seemed to be fading away. However, when his eyes fell on Ling Chu, who was lying in the big cloak, his throat rolled. At this moment, Ling Chu's outer clothes were already messy and open. Due to the effect of the charming poison, the snow-white skin was stained with a layer of bright crimson. The softness kept shaking in front of Ning Chui according to her movements, like two peaches, inviting him to taste them. Ning Chui grabbed the big cloak with both hands, veins popping out. There are two completely different voices competing with each other in my mind. Big beads of sweat kept rolling down his forehead. The drops fell on Ling Chu's gorgeous skin, splashing a beautiful halo. Ning Chui breathed quickly and thickly, her throat rolled, and her sense finally gained the upper hand with difficulty. He closed his eyes tightly and stood up from the cloak. However, at this moment, Ling Chu, who was unconscious, could no longer bear it. While holding his neck and pulling him down, he arched his body dissatisfiedly and leaned towards him. Noticing her movement, Ning Chui trembled and tried to stop her in a hoarse voice, "Chu, you can't." His voice was hoarse, with an uncontrollable tremor. At this moment, Ling Chu felt that he was about to explode in discomfort. "Can't hear a word at all." Seeing that Ning Chui had exhausted all his strength, he could not move at all. I was immediately extremely dissatisfied with him. "Hurry up and hug her tightly," wanting to be close to her. Ning Chui didn't expect her to make such a bold move, so she opened her eyes in surprise. "Hurry," and held Ling Chu's arm tightly, trying to pull her away. However, at this moment, Ling Chu has never been able to get what he wants, so he is not willing to let go. It even looks like an octopus with its arms and legs wrapped around each other to move upwards. Ning Chui called out several times in a dumb voice, but Ling Chu turned a deaf ear. His eyes fell on her smooth forehead. A gorgeous phoenix flower on the top is flickering, disappearing, and appearing. Ning Chui stared at the flower for a few breaths, then gritted his teeth and looked away, grabbed the incomplete dagger that had fallen beside the cloak at some point, and stabbed the wound on his leg. As the blood dripped, a smell of blood floated into Ling Chu's nose. She paused and lowered her head subconsciously. "Chu, don't look." Ning Chui didn't expect that she would regain her consciousness at this moment. She subconsciously threw the dagger and wanted to cover her eyes to prevent her from looking. But it was a step too late. Blood was reflected in his eyes, and Ling Chu's face turned pale. His eyes moved up from Ning Chui's wound little by little, and when he saw his hand, his expression changed and he quickly let go of his hand. Ning Chui just breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Ling Chu grabbing the dagger on the ground and stabbing himself in the neck. No, Ning Chui's liver and gallbladder were split, and he grabbed Ling Chu's wrist like lightning. Looking at the dagger less than an inch away from her neck, Ning Chui broke out in a cold sweat. Ling Chu couldn't move and couldn't help but struggled in anger. She actually did not fully regain her consciousness, nor did she realize what she was doing. She only knew that something was extremely wrong with her, and she felt so uncomfortable that she was about to die. She desperately threw down her face and cried for Ning Chui. The person who keeps saying that he likes her actually refuses to have her despite committing suicide twice. Ling Chu, who was unconscious, could not remember Ning Chui risking his life by jumping off a cliff to save him. She only knew that she was begging him so shamelessly, but Ning Chui was unmoved. This is a great insult to her. Humiliated and annoyed, the hand holding the dagger struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Ning Chui's grasp. However, Ning Chui was afraid of hurting her, so he didn't dare to let her break free. With a clever move, he pulled the dagger out of her hand. "Chu, calm down and don't hurt yourself." He refused to persuade her, but Ling Chu seemed to have been greatly wronged by this opening, and big tears rolled down from her eyes. "You lied, you said you liked me, but you don't want me at all. Thanks for the monthly ticket support of I Want to Forget You, Mary Todd, and CUWSQ if there is an afterlife. Thanks to Falling Leaves Haikyuu. Ad. Panax Noto Ginseng. DB, Shu WSQ, 1402121840214228, Yan. Remember to forget, Xianbin, Wuhu Dash, Yunyun Zongshen, China Fuse. The goat song and the story of the eyes, habits are with you, journey to the east and remember the tiger, why we grow old, CHLWCH, .v, silent blessings, falling leaves know the autumn. Add recommendation vote support. Thanks to Hungziu and the book friends who support Hungziu. It's a rare 2 updates today, so I wish you all a happy Lantern Festival and all the best. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 454. Looking at Ling Chu, who was as aggrieved as a few-year-old girl, Ning Chui's eyes flashed with helplessness. He wanted her and almost went crazy thinking about it. But they were not married yet, and they had not obtained the consent of their elders. How could he want her at this moment? Ning Chui endured the surging desire and the large drops of sweat, and coaxed in a hoarse voice, "Chu, good boy, I know you are not feeling well, please bear with it a little longer. I will take you to the doctor right away, okay?" Ning Chui coaxed, and tried to reason with Ling Chu. But Ling Chu, who was in a state of confusion at the moment, could not hear even a single sentence. She couldn't bear the poisonous temptation. Looking at Ning Chui with a pair of beautiful and aggrieved eyes, perhaps she was annoyed when she thought of the dagger that he had taken away. Suddenly she lunged forward, opened her mouth and nibbled on his thin lips. His hand went down to grab the ferocious beast. Ning Chui saw him suddenly rushing towards her and was worried that she might fall, so she subconsciously opened her arms to hug her. I was not prepared for the movements in her hands, and she was caught in the act. Perhaps he was afraid that Ning Chui would it away like a dagger again, so Ling Chu not only grabbed it hard, but also used his other hand. Ning Chui's body suddenly froze, and a numbness quickly rushed from his tailbone to his mind. A painful and suppressed groan immediately rolled out of his throat. Looking at Ling Chu, who was glaring at him with a provocative and proud expression, Ning Chui twitched his brows fiercely. I know her current situation very well, and I can't even listen to a word of advice, let alone beat or scold her. He could only take a deep breath, raise his hand to grab Ling Chu's wrist, and press the acupuncture point slightly. Pain came, and Ling Chu's eyes widened accusingly. Ning Chui didn't care about coaxing her. When she loosened her strength, she immediately saw the opportunity and quickly pulled her hands away. Seeing that he was defeated again by Ning Chui, Ling Chu immediately became furious. He opened his small mouth and bit his shoulder regardless. She used a lot of force, but Ning Chui didn't even move his brows and let her vent her anger. As long as she stopped making noises to catch the ferocious beast in him, he would be extremely happy. Ning Chui thought that Ling Chu would give up after venting his anger. Unexpectedly, she took a bite. She thought the muscles were too hard and quickly let go. He raised his head and glared at Ning Chui again, and suddenly pushed his shoulders hard with both hands. Ning Chui subconsciously wanted to fight back, but when he saw her angry and innocent eyes, he instinctively gave up his strength. Seeing him fall backward, Ling Chu immediately turned from anger to joy. But she did not stop, but instead pounced on him with both hands and feet. He crossed his legs and sat down heavily on Ning Chui's waist. The high-spirited ferocious beast was suppressed by her, and Ning Chui groaned again. He was panting heavily, his dark eyes filled with suppressed emotions. Chu, get up quickly. After being provoked again and again, Ning Chui's reason was on the verge of collapse again, and he gasped and roared. But instead of getting up, Ling Chu acted like an unreasonable little girl who insisted on going against the adults. Hunted heavily, I don't want it. Seeing that Ning Chui looked in pain, she had no idea what kind of crisis she was facing. She just thought that her martial arts skills were so great that he was unable to resist. In order to retaliate for the painful pinch, Ling Chu deliberately raised his body a little like a mischievous child, and then quickly sat down again. Ning Chui was about to go crazy from being tortured by her. But Ling Chu had no idea that maybe she felt uncomfortable with the ferocious beast beneath her. She frowned in disgust, then moved her buttocks, and then moved around, trying to find a comfortable position. Unexpectedly, the ferocious beast was not suppressed by her, but instead swelled up rapidly. Ning Chui was in pain, but at the same time he was occupied by pleasure. He was breathing heavily. In order to resist the powerful waves of charming poison, he endured extremely hard. The muscles of his arms bulged tightly, his red eyes looked like those of a man-eating beast, and veins popped out on his forehead. Suppressing the impact of charming poison once again, Ning Chui raised his hands, trying to grab Ling Chu's waist to stop her from continuing. Ling Chu happened to raise his buttocks at this moment and sat back. He reached out and grabbed Ning Chui's belt. I don't know whether it was because the belt was loosened during the struggle between the two of them, or because Ling Chu was too strong. She really succeeded. The moment the pants were pulled down, a ferocious beast jumped out of them. Ling Chu, who was just thinking about finding the hidden weapon on Ning Chui, was startled by the ferocious beast. Ah, so terrible! She screamed and let go of her hand, rushing forward quickly. Ning Chui was hurriedly trying to sit up when he felt a faint fragrance coming towards him. As soon as he opened his mouth, before he could speak, a big, round peach rushed into his mouth. Such a scene is unbearable even for a saint, let alone Ning Chui, who is full of blood and has been poisoned by charm. There was a loud bang in his mind. What remains of sanity is gone. With red eyes, he instinctively held the big peach in his mouth. Bite, tear, suck. After tasting everything, it's still not enough. Hands of tight arms quickly exerted force. The positions of the two people were immediately reversed. The few clothes on her body were quickly scattered on the ground. Just when the hot beast was about to break through the door, a strong wind suddenly poured in from the stone window, accompanied by a loud thunder. Ling Chu shivered, and a sense of clarity flooded into his mind. His eyes fell on Ning Chui, who was still naked, and his eyes suddenly widened. Her first reaction was that Ning Chui was molesting her. But when she saw that her straight legs were firmly clamped on the other party's lean waist, and the images rolling through my mind, Ling Chu's heart trembled, and then trembled again. It turned out that it was not Ning Chui who was molesting her. It was she who wanted to Mr. Ning. Ling Chu wished that God would immediately drop a thunderbolt and knock her out. Before he could think of how to explain his behavior, the suppressed charm in Ling Chu struck back again. Seeing that his sanity was about to be overwhelmed by the charm, the system suddenly issued a weak warning. Ding! Warn the host that the body is poisoned, and if the yin and yang are not combined in time, the body will explode and die. Ling Chu was surprised and wanted to ask the system if there was an antidote. But she called again and again, but the system didn't respond at all. Ling Chu knew that the last trace of energy in the system was exhausted and forced it to shut down. Ning Chui, who was shocked back to his senses by the thunder, stopped at the critical moment. Closing his eyes, he couldn't let the poison in his body destroy Ling Chu. Ning Chui gritted her teeth, suppressed her raging desire, and was about to let go of Ling Chu. Unexpectedly, she spoke at this moment, "Sir, wait a minute." Ning Chui moved for a moment, his red eyes filled with confusion. He had just clearly realized that Ling Chu had decided to quit, but he didn't know why he wanted to stop him. Ling Chu saw the confusion in his eyes, but she had no time to explain, and the more she suppressed the reaction, the stronger the toxicity became. "Did Your Excellency say that after returning to Beijing, you need to go to Dingyuan Prince's mansion to propose marriage?" Ning Chui was startled. Although she didn't know why she suddenly mentioned this, the beast was still gaining momentum. "This situation is really not suitable to discuss this issue," he said in a hoarse voice, Get up first and put on your clothes. Ling Chu, however, shook his head and said, after my lord returns to the capital, go and propose marriage to my father, the princess, and my concubine. Thanks to Mary Todd, if there is an afterlife, I want to forget you, 877,199, and Vivian Lee for their monthly support. Thanks for the silent blessing, pros. BA, Ixixi, Panax Noto Ginseng. DB, Iryi, Xianbin, V, Yunyun Zongshen, 20230521742110, Fei Wenli, Chen, free as the wine 459, Figsu. EB, Yulu Banhan, Yan Guxing, 2020706130425328, Why Do We Grow Old, Happy Baby, Crystal at Diamond, on the cell phone, Morning Flowers Under the Scorching Sun, Colorful Life, Ixixi and other book friends recommend and vote for support. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. Thanks to the book friends who support Hungziu. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 455. Is she agreeing to marry him? Ning Chui's heart was beating fiercely. He never knew that one day he would be as nervous as a young boy. Seeing Ling Chu's face turned red and his brows smiling, Ning Chui was so happy that she couldn't help but draw her arms into her arms. But he forgot that the two of them were not even naked. The ferocious beast accidentally moved forward and arrived at Huaxin's door. Ling Chu shivered and fell into Ning Chui's arms. A low moan escaped from his throat. Feeling the softness above and the attractive flowers below, Ning Chui's breath suddenly tightened. Resisting the urge to break in, he took 2 rough breaths, fearing that he would see something he shouldn't, so he quickly closed his eyes. He said in a hoarse voice, "Shu, please put on your clothes first. We have to find a doctor as soon as possible to detoxify the poison." Ning Chui grabbed Ling Chu's shoulders with both hands and carefully straightened her body. However, Ling Chu did not leave him, and put his arms around his neck. "Sir, it's too late. We are poisoned by love. If we don't have sex, we will explode and die. Even though I haven't gotten married to Ning Chui yet, I have to have a bridal chamber with him first. This is against the rules. But now they are in the deep mountains and wild forests, with no treatment or medicine, and the system cannot be opened. They have no choice but this way." Ning Chui frowned. He didn't want to threaten Ling Chu's innocence before they got married. He was still calculating how to take Ling Chu out as quickly as possible and find a doctor. Ling Chu knew that they would not have time to find a doctor to detoxify. She could see that Ning Chui didn't want to pay homage to her as Duke of Zhou before they got married, but Ling Chu didn't have as many concerns about this kind of thing as he did. One of the reasons is that she is not a native girl. More importantly, the moment Ning Chui jumped off the cliff to save her, she knew she had fallen in love with him. Since they are happy with each other and have plans to get married, whether they should save their innocence until the wedding night is not that important in the face of life and death. Ling Chu didn't want to lose 2 lives in vain for such a pedantic idea. She ignored Ning Chui's hesitation, hugged him, and kissed him with her red lips. Ning Chui was startled and turned her head to avoid it. "Shu, we have to wait until we get married." Ling Chu thought he had made it clear enough, but he didn't expect that he was still insisting. She endured her thirst and looked at Ning Chui with an aggrieved look on her face. "Sir, could it be that your words that you liked me and wanted to marry me were all lies?" Ning Chui felt even more uncomfortable because of the poisonous charm in their bodies and how close they were to each other, but he still shook his head. "Of course not." Ling Chu interrupted him before he could finish his words. "If not, then why don't you want me?" Seeing that he was about to explain, Ling Chu didn't give him a chance. He turned his head and whispered in Ning Chui's ear, "Could it be that you don't think I'm beautiful enough?" The warm breath blew into her ears, and Ning Chui's eyes suddenly turned dark. Ling Chu seemed to feel that it was not enough. He straightened his body and the two soft moved forward. Ning Chui immediately thought of the peaches she had tasted before, and her Adam's apple rolled heavily. Some delicious foods become addictive once you start tasting them. But he could never get over the hurdle in his heart. Ling Chu had already made up his mind to marry Ning Chui, but he was more open-minded than him. Just for this kind of thing, she originally wanted to let the other party take the initiative, so she flirted with him twice and then stopped. Unexpectedly, Ning Chui's concentration was still there, but she couldn't stand it at first due to the poisonous charm. That's all, in that case, let her eat Lord Ning. With this thought, Ling Chu no longer hesitated and took the initiative. While Ning Chui was still struggling, she first pounced hard and knocked him down. He then climbed up using his hands and feet. Regardless of Ning Chui's obstruction, he opened his red lips and bit his thin lips. Although Ling Chu had made up his mind to eat Ning Chui, Ling Chu had no practical experience. Let alone in this life, in her last life, when she was studying, she was dragged by her best friend to secretly watch 2 pornographic films. At first, her movements were clumsy and she almost bit Ning Chui's lip. But it was probably due to the effect of the charm poison and the memory of watching movies in her previous life that she quickly mastered the technique. Lilac Uvula insists on breaking in. The 2 long, slender, and straight legs were also entangled intentionally or unintentionally. Ning Chui was able to hold back at first, but Ling Chu's soft body kept sticking close to him, and her little hands lit fire everywhere on his body. There is no way he can avoid it. Seeing that Ling Chu's snow-white skin was glowing with a layer of pink under the influence of the charming poison. Under the warm light of the firewood, the eyes are charming and the body is fragrant. The ferocious beast immediately swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although Ling Chu is physically weak, his figure is not bad. At this moment, her consciousness was lost again, and she could only act instinctively following Miyato's guidance. Ning Chui was extremely determined, and was quickly defeated by her screams one after another. The tail of the eye turns red and the throat rolls twice. Finally, he couldn't hold it back and once again took the pink peach that was shaking in front of his eyes in his mouth. Hand out your hand, grab the remaining one, and knead it into different shapes. Although Ning Chui's grip was tight, his big hands, which were usually used to holding swords and guns, were not very strong. Control the force carefully and watch it constantly change in your palm. The thin cocoon in the palm brings out countless pleasures. Ling Chu's body felt as if sparks had been set off. He half closed his eyes and held his breath, and his slender neck subconsciously raised high. He shivered twice, groaned unbearably, and quickly softened. Ning Chui's eyes darkened again, but he had never tasted such a delicious peach in his life, and he was not willing to let go. Still holding it tightly, he gently bit it twice. Control carefully. His legs cooperated with his waist and he pushed hard, holding Ling Chu and turning him over. Men go up and women go down. Ling Chu was trembling, put his hands on Ning Chui's shoulders, and hummed softly. While twisting, she held onto his arm and whispered softly, "Sir, I feel so uncomfortable." "Where do you feel bad?" Ning Chui had to open her mouth and let go of Tao Zi, and asked in a hoarse voice. Ling Chu's eyes were blurred, and he held his big hand and moved it from top to bottom, here, and here. "Sir, I feel so uncomfortable, please help me." Her beautiful eyes were filled with tears, and her voice was humming, aggrieved and dissatisfied. How could Ning Chui bear to refuse the cry of her sweetheart? Wander along her hand. Ling Chu asked him to take care of her like this, and the itch in her heart and liver was not only relieved by half, but also a trace of nectar slowly emerged from the center of the flower. Ning Chui's eyes were red, and his Adam's apple was rolling up and down, but he still endured it and did not let the vicious beast break the door. His movements were careful and meticulous, and he had a lot of compassion in his heart. The big hands hold it carefully, kneading gently and twisting slowly. Ling Chu lay on the big cloak, his body softened into a puddle of water, breathing heavily, and a charming fragrance slowly emitted from the cave. Thanks to Penglai Jiangxiu and Ersiu for their monthly support. Thanks to 140212184021428641,417, Journey to the West Tiger, Prose. B.A., China Fuse, Yan, Xianbin, 20230521742110, Colorful Life, Why We Grow Old, Prose. B.A., Red Leaves Fluttering. E. Fi, Lazy supported by the recommendation votes of book friends such as Langzixi, Yunyun Zongshen, 20230123755752, CHLWCH, Morning Flowers Under the Scorching Sun, Wuhu Dash, Luolugo. B.A., Xiahonki. D.C., Panax Noto Ginseng. D.B. Thanks to the book friends who support Hengziu. Thanks to the book friends who support Hengziu. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 456. Outside the cave, it was windy and rainy. In the cave, the fire was burning brightly. I do not know how long it has been. Ling Chu's body went limp, and he also fainted. I do not know how long it has been. She slowly opened her eyes. His eyes were confused, he caught a glimpse of the stone wall on the side, and he still didn't come back to his senses. But soon, many memories flooded into my mind. She was startled and subconsciously wanted to wake up. But he didn't want to move, and there was a muffled groan above his head. Woke up. Hearing the familiar voice, Ling Chu subconsciously raised his head and saw Ning Chui, who had always been expressionless, looking at her tenderly. Ling Chu was about to speak, but found himself lying on Ning Chui's body. Her cheeks turned red for a moment, and she was about to stand up with her hands on her hands. But Ning Chui suddenly stopped. His big palm pinched her waist and held her still. He held her face in his hands and asked in a deep voice, "Shu, who am I?" Under the itching, Ling Chu twisted uncomfortably, but found that he couldn't move an inch. He could only look up accusingly, blinking his eyes for a long time before saying, "Sir." Although his tone was a little hesitant, fortunately, he still recognized him. Ning Chui has heard the word sir many times from Ling Chu. But in the past, her voice was cold, and these two words were often spoken with a chill. But at this moment, under the poison of charm, there is a soft charm. Fell in Ning Chui's ears, and something strange arose in her heart. He kissed her face and whispered, "Change the title." Ling Chu didn't say anything, just frowned and stared at him dissatisfied. Seeing that she didn't speak, Ning Chui kissed her again and said, "Good boy, let's change your name." Seeing the bulging veins on his forehead and the red eyes, it was obvious that he had endured extremely hard work. Ling Chu didn't quite understand why he insisted on letting her change her title at this moment. She didn't want to change, but Ning Chui didn't move and wouldn't let her move. The numbing itching made her a little unbearable. He could only speak another person, "Brother Ning." This voice, as charming as a nightingale, was like a cat's claw gently scratching Ning Chui's heartstrings. Ning Chui's Adam's apple rolled up and down, and the red ends of his eyes gave a hint of coquettishness to his formerly stern face. She could only glare at him angrily. Ning Chui just pretended to be invisible and continued to say softly, "Be good in the beginning, and try another one." Ling Chu didn't want to pay attention to him, but if she didn't change, Ning Chui wouldn't move. "Be good, try another one." Ling Chu glanced at him sideways and turned his head to express his rejection. But her concentration was not as good as Ning Chui's, and the itching inside her body made her scratch her heart and liver. After repeated attempts, I had to give in. But she didn't know what he wanted to hear. Be good and call me husband. Ling Chu stared at her. What husband? I'm not married to you yet, so don't scream. Ning Chui glanced at her and said with a half smile, why, after the wife has eaten and wiped her husband clean, she wants to renege on the debt? That's not possible. You promised me to go to the prince and princess to propose marriage, how can you renege on the debt? Ling Chu was stunned. She did say this. However, she said that she ate him, which she did not admit. Don't you know who ate whom? Seeing the smile on his lips, Ling Chu reached out and pinched his arm in dissatisfaction. So hard she meant his muscles. Ning Chui smiled meaningfully. He leaned close to his ear and coaxed, be good and call me husband. I'll give it to you when you call me. The voice that used to be cold and ruthless is now deep and hoarse, restrained and coaxing. Ling Chu's ears felt numb and his eyes were blurred. Husband. Had he been awake, Ling Chu would never have made such a sound. But at this moment, under the influence of Miadu, she couldn't control it at all. She only relied on instinct and followed Miadu's guidance to speak. An extremely strong numbness shot straight from Ning Chui's lower abdomen to Tianling Gai. He finally understood why, throughout the ages, no matter what kind of men they would be addicted to the land of gentleness and could not extricate themselves. Even he himself was not spared. Ning Chui has always been true to his word. When Ling Chu called him, he immediately took action. Madam, I will give it to you now. Ling Chu quickly pressed his hands on his chest. Wait a minute. Ning Chui looked at her puzzled. What other instructions does madam have? She took a deep breath, gritted her teeth to endure the dense itching, and lightly opened her red lips. Is it true that you are not married yet? Ning Chui was really surprised by Ling Chu's sudden words. He didn't care that she called him back and nodded. Of course it's true. His expression was serious and he didn't look like he was lying. Ling Chu actually knew that if Ning Chui was married, no one in the capital would know about it. But she still wanted to ask it herself. What about the concubines? Do you have any concubines? Seeing that she asked carefully, Ning Chui was not impatient. I have neither been married nor taken any concubines. After a pause, he added, there are no maids in the room. Ling Chu's eyes were suspicious. The ancients believed in getting married first and then starting a career. As far as she knew, many young men in Kyoto got married and took concubines at a young age. Some people even have children running around Ning Chui's age. Even if some of them are not yet married, in order to prevent the children in the family from getting frustrated, they will arrange for a maid to teach them about human affairs. Ning Chui didn't get married or take any concubines, she believed it. But she didn't believe that he didn't even have a maid in the living room. How else could he be so familiar with that kind of thing? Although she was unconscious due to the poison, she still had some memories in her mind. Ning Chui's methods are not like those of a novice who doesn't understand anything. On the contrary, his technique is very familiar, like a veteran who has experienced many battles. Ling Chu's suspicion was not hidden, it was almost written on his face. Ning Chui didn't know what she was suspecting at first, but now, he was really angry and funny. Madam, don't worry, everything I said is true. I am really not married, nor am I having any concubines. Ling Chu squinted at him. So, you are a frequent visitor to the brothel. Ning Chui was not angry at all at her questioning. Instead, he was in a good mood, and even his eyes were shining brightly. Ma'am, are you jealous? Who is jealous? If you don't even have a maid in the same room, why do you act like a seasoned veteran? Although she denied it, Ning Chui had a smile in her eyes. He leaned into her ear and whispered, Madam, do you know that there is a kind of book in this world called pictures? Ling Chu glared at him. Of course she knew. but she didn't quite believe that he could be so proficient with just one book. Her doubts were written all over her face, and Ning Chui couldn't ignore them even if she wanted to. There is no way, your husband is too smart, he knows everything without a teacher. Ling Chu looked at him speechlessly. She never knew that Mr. Ning, who had always been ruthless, could have such an arrogant side. End of chapter. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 457. Ning Chui did not lie. Because of his life experience, he has not been liked by Mrs. Ningguo since he was a child, and she has always been extremely cold towards him. With ease, in order to prevent their children from becoming addicted to brothels and being seduced by unscrupulous women outside, they usually arrange for maids to teach them how to deal with affairs. But when Ning Chui was young, Mrs. Ning Qiagong didn't know his life experience, thinking that he was the son of her husband and an outside woman, so she always disliked him. Even seeing him was extremely indifferent, let alone arranging for him to have a maid to teach him. Gong Ningguo saw this matter in his eyes. Although he had tried to persuade his wife, Mrs. Ningguo Gong turned a deaf ear and still did nothing. Ning Chui has been sensible and self-disciplined since he was a child. Ning Qiagong is not afraid that he will be seduced by those bad women outside, but he is worried that he will be depressed. Thinking about arranging some maids to help him out, but as a father, he was too embarrassed to interfere in his son's affairs. So he thought that if he had a girl he liked and could get married early, he would not have these worries. Unexpectedly, as Ning Qiagong waited year after year, Ning Chui became more and more indifferent and never had contact with any girl. Especially after joining Jin Yiwei, his methods became more ruthless and ruthless. Not to mention the girl's family, even many officials in the court stayed away when they saw him. Let alone anyone he likes, there is almost no woman around him, and all the waiters in the yard are servants. Gradually, Ning Qiagong became more and more worried. Not only was she worried that he would be depressed, but she was also worried that he would grow crookedly. If he liked Long Yang, how could he be worthy of his sister? Ning Qiagong no longer cared about the problem of face, and proposed to arrange a few maids to serve Ning Chui, but he refused. In desperation, Ning Qiagong could only ask his servants to spend a lot of money to buy several albums and give them to the servants around Ning Chui, hinting that they should give them to Ning Chui. Ling Chu glanced up and down at Ning Chui with a smile. He didn't expect that Ning Qiagong would be worried that he liked Long Yang because he was so masculine. It can only be said that parents all over the world have the common problem of being confused when they are concerned. Ning Chui felt helpless when she saw her smiling happily. Now do you believe in your husband's innocence? I am innocent, but are you really so good at this kind of thing just by relying on a few books? All the young men in Kyoto like to drink flower wine, have you never been to a brothel? Having known each other for such a long time, Ling Chu actually knew that Ning Chui was not someone who liked to visit brothels. Simply speaking, he couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. She originally thought Ning Chui would deny it. Unexpectedly, he nodded unexpectedly, Mrs. dissatisfied, I have visited a brothel, but that was to investigate a case. Ning Qiagong asked his servant to give him pictures of the palace, and Ning Chui also saw them. But at that time, he was completely curious about why so many men had wives and concubines at home, often staying in brothels at night, and keeping secret wives. He wanted to answer his doubts, so he read all the pictures. However, at that time, his heart was still and he didn't feel much even after seeing the pictures. He happened to be investigating a case, so he didn't shy away from it and went to the brothel. It is natural to inevitably see some pictures. But even if I saw it with my own eyes, I still wouldn't be impressed. It was not until now that he had experienced it with his sweetheart that he truly realized that this kind of thing really knows how to taste it. Ning Chui smiled and put her arms around Ling Chu. Madam, you don't have to doubt it. Even if you have never eaten pork, You have seen pigs running. What's more, your husband is so smart, he can naturally learn without a teacher. Seeing Ling Chu looking at him speechlessly, Ning Chui smiled. This is just a great opportunity. I really don't want Ling Chu to ask any more questions. That painting was made by a famous artist. Not only is it lifelike, but it also has many different movements. If my wife wants to see it, when we get married, my husband can study it with you. But I feel uncomfortable now, and madam doesn't want to see me endure it hard, right? After Ning Chui finished speaking, she leaned over and kissed her red lips. Even though Ling Chu didn't want him to succeed, the poison in her body was still lingering and she couldn't resist. Ning Chui was in a good mood and guided him quietly, experiencing both the scenes he saw in the pictures. If he hadn't been worried about her body, he would have wanted to let go of every scene. By the time the clouds finally cleared and the rain stopped, Ling Chu was exhausted. After putting on my clothes, my legs were trembling. He staggered and was about to fall, so he stretched out his hand to hold onto the wall beside him. Unexpectedly, as soon as he pressed it, a raised stone on his right hand suddenly sunk inward. After 2 clicks, a crack suddenly opened in a stone cave 8 or 9 steps away. After the sound sounded, Ning Chui immediately protected Ling Chu behind him. After waiting for a while, seeing that there was nothing unusual, he cautiously walked over to check. It turned out to be a stone gate. With a push, the stone door opened. Behind the door was a path similar to a stone cave. It was only big enough for 2 people to pass, but it was unknown where it led. What surprised Ling Chu was that the mountain breeze that flowed in along the trail in the middle of winter was actually warm. If you listen carefully, there seemed to be various different kinds of bird calls. Ning Chui was also a little surprised. He hesitated and said, "You stay here, I'll go take a look." They haven't found a way out yet. Since there is a road behind the stone gate, they have to go and see what's going on. Although Ling Chu was curious and wanted to follow to find out, her legs were weak at the moment and she couldn't walk at all. I can only nod, "Okay, be careful." I thought I would have to wait for a while, but I didn't expect that Ning Chui would come back soon after leaving along the stone gate. Seeing that he looked good, Ling Chu became more and more curious. "What's the situation over there?" "It's a good place. I'll take you to see it." Ning Chui didn't say much, walked over and picked her up. Although she felt a little embarrassed, Ling Chu's legs were now as soft as noodles. She couldn't walk even if she wanted to, so she could only be held by him. The mountain road behind the stone gate is winding. The further you go in, the better the light becomes. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, I came out of the cave and my sight suddenly opened up. A piece of emerald green leaps into view. Looking at the scenery in front of him, Ling Chu was really surprised. This is not only a good place, it is also an exaggeration to say it is a fairyland. It is obviously winter, but the trees here are green and the grass is luxuriant. The air after the rain is particularly fresh, and the wind blowing across my cheeks is warm. Hundreds of birds are chirping in the trees, and foxes, squirrels, and monkeys are jumping up and down. You can see large expanses of blooming flowers everywhere underground, colorful, with butterflies of various colors dancing on the flowers. Pheasants, hares, turtle doves, goats, badgers, robes and other animals were wandering around on the grass. Ling Chu even saw 2 cicaderes, 2 large, 2 small, and 4 under the big tree not far away. These animals did not panic and run away when they saw these 2 uninvited guests. He just looked at it curiously, then withdrew his gaze and continued walking and looking for food. Not afraid of life at all. Ling Chu couldn't help but want to come down and play with them. But Ning Chui held her in his arms and walked to a steaming hot spring pool before stopping. End of chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 458. It's great that there is a hot spring pool here. Since leaving Xianqing Temple, Ling Chu has not taken a good bath. Just now I did exercise with Ning Chui again, just when my whole body was sore and weak. Now that she saw this hot spring pool, she couldn't wait to go in and take a good dip. Ning Chui saw that her eyes were bright and the corners of her mouth were raised high. The first time he saw the soup pool, he knew that Ling Chu would definitely like it. This water is not hot, just right. You can wash it slowly. Ning Chui put her down and left, but he didn't go far and stayed nearby. After all, this is the wilderness. Although it is unlikely that there will be outsiders, we must be on guard against wild beasts suddenly jumping out. Ling Chu felt relieved knowing that Ning Chui was there. Seeing him standing far away with his back turned, she immediately started to take off her clothes. Originally she planned to go take a bath in the small clothes she was wearing, but after she fell off the cliff, she only had the set of clothes on her, not to mention her luggage, and didn't even have a change of clothes. If she goes to take a bath in small clothes, there is no second piece to change into, so she can't be left empty after taking a dip. There are no outsiders here, and Ning Chui is far away. Ling Chu hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and took it all off. Ling Chu walked barefoot into the hot spring pool and immediately sighed comfortably. She frowned as she looked at the bruises on her body. Thinking of his behavior under the influence of charming poison, Ling Chu didn't have the nerve to blame Ning Chui for not being sympathetic to her. Looking around, although the hot spring pool is not big, it is more than enough to soak a few people. Seeing that the water next to her was a little shallow, Ling Chu slowly walked toward the middle, and the water level just reached her chest. Taking a deep breath, I first took a handful of water with my hands to wash my face, then took off my bun and started washing my long hair. Just as she bent down to dip her long hair into the water and was so focused on washing it, something suddenly hit her back. This sudden move startled Ling Chu. In the panic, he stepped on something, his feet slipped, and he couldn't control his body and fell backwards. Ning Chui heard the noise and quickly turned around, only to see a monkey squeaking strangely and running away into the distance. Seeing Ling Chu sinking into the pond, he ignored the monkey. He flew over using Qinggong and jumped into the warm soup pool before he could even take off his clothes. The people were fished out in twos and twos. Ling Chu hugged Ning Chui's neck, still in shock. Ning Chui patted her back and said, "Don't be afraid, it's just a monkey." Ling Chu breathed a sigh of relief, and then realized with embarrassment that he was naked at the moment. After hurriedly letting go of Ning Chui, he was about to hide in the water. What a coincidence that I stepped on the same slippery stone again. Seeing that she was about to sink into the pond again, Ning Chui quickly supported her with quick eyes and hands. "Be careful." Ling Chu took a deep breath, and just as he suppressed his embarrassment, he heard a strange laughter coming from not far away. Looking sideways, I saw it was a white-faced long-tailed monkey. I think it was him who hit her with something just now. Ling Chu was speechless for a moment. She didn't expect that the monkey hit her with something, but actually clapped his hands and stamped his feet to laugh at her like a naughty child. It was not afraid of Ling Chu, but when it saw Ning Chui staring at it with an unkind expression, it probably felt threatened, so it smashed another small stone in its hand over, then turned around and ran away. With Ling Chu still around, Ning Chui would naturally not chase a monkey. He raised his hand to catch the pebble and was about to throw it aside. But Ling Chu stopped him. "Wait a minute, show me." Ning Chui was a little confused, but he still handed her the stone in his hand. The stone was not big. Ling Chu turned it over to the back and saw a bit of emerald green exposed on it. It turned out to be jadeite. No wonder she vaguely saw a flash of green when the long-tailed monkey hit her just now. Thinking of what had just hit her back, Ling Chu hurriedly lowered his head and looked at the bottom of the soup pool. A round piece of jadeite as big as half an egg is lying next to his right foot. Ning Chui couldn't hide his surprise after picking it up. This piece of jade is better than the one in Ling Chu's hand in terms of color and water quality. This jadeite is a bit rough in polishing. It doesn't look like it was made by skilled jade carvers, but it looks like it was polished by the long-tailed monkey just now. I don't know where the monkey got it from. Ning Chui just glanced at it twice before giving the jadeite to Ling Chu. No matter where it came from, it's all yours now. Ling Chu did not refuse such a good thing. It just so happened that her system had run out of energy, so she would absorb it later and see if she could turn it back on. Remembering that the bath was not finished yet, Ling Chu handed the jade to Ning Chui again. "Sir, please go up first, I will take a bath for a while." Ning Chui did not move, and said slowly, "No hurry, since I'm down, I'll take a shower too." Ling Chu was stunned. Although they had been naked, she had never thought of bathing with him. Although Ning Chui didn't say anything, she didn't think that a man who had just started eating meat could bear to do nothing in this situation. Sure enough, after Ning Chui put the two pieces of jade on the edge of the pool, she said to Ling Chu, "Madam, you just said you were too tired to move a finger. I'll give you a bath just in time." Seeing the wolf-like light in his eyes, Ling Chu chuckled twice, unable to tell that he was not interested in drinking. "No need. How dare I bother you with such tasks as taking a bath? I can just do it myself." Ning Chui's eyes flashed with a smile, but she changed the subject calmly. "Madam, have you noticed any changes in yourself?" Ling Chu lowered his head in confusion and glanced up and down. She was still looking for changes in herself, but Ning Chui had quietly walked around her back, stretched out his arms, and hugged her. Ling Chu was startled and subconsciously wanted to struggle. Ning Chui already held the big peach with both hands, and a deep voice fell in her ear, "Madam, didn't you notice that all the traces on her body have disappeared?" Ling Chu made a move, his eyes fell on himself, and then he realized that the bruises on her body had disappeared at some point, and her skin was as white as snow again. "I didn't expect that this hot spring has such a magical healing effect, madam. Please take more bubbles, it will be good for your health." Ling Chu stared at him and said sideways, "Huh, don't think that I don't know what your intention is to change the subject on purpose." Ning Chui was not upset when she saw through it. Instead, he unhurriedly threw out another bait, "Madam, don't you want to know whether this warm soup pool can cure the charm poison in us?" Even though she didn't want to believe it, Ling Chu had to admit that Ning Chui's words really touched her weakness. Although she didn't explode and die after the between yin and yang, the residual itching on her body told her that the poison of love in her body had not been completely eliminated. "I don't know what exactly they were bitten by. Although the imperial doctors in Kyoto have good medical skills, they are still far away from returning to the capital. With suppose he gets poisoned on the road and gets an assassination? The consequences are unimaginable. Since this warm soup pool can heal injuries, you have to give it a try. What if it can really detoxify?" End of chapter. I made a fortune by raiding houses in ancient times. Author, Half-Life Calligraphy. Chapter 459. Waiting until the sun set, Ning Chui with a satisfied look on his face called out his troops and retreated. Ling Chu glared at him fiercely. If she hadn't been so hungry, she doubted that this man would be willing to stop. Ning Chui was not annoyed when she saw her glaring at him. After carrying her to the hot spring pool, he looked attentive and wanted to help her wipe her body and get dressed. Ling Chu didn't dare to let him touch her again, otherwise she wouldn't have to go back later. "Well, madam, you can't blame me. Who made you look so good looking that I can't bear to let go?" Ning Chui also knew that he had indeed gone too far, but he had been holding back for 20 years, and once he started eating meat, he was inevitably a little greedy. Ling Chu glanced sideways at him, looking like he was taking advantage of him and acting like a good boy. He felt his hands itching and wanted to beat him up. Ning Chui was afraid that she would be really annoyed, so he didn't dare to tease her anymore. Instead, he looked at Wen Tamchi with a look of regret. It's such a pity that such a treasure can't be taken away. Ling Chu also felt regretful that the itchy and unbearable feeling on their bodies was gone. There is nothing magical about this warm soup pool, but it can not only detoxify, but also make Ning Chui's injuries much better. Even her area didn't feel the slightest discomfort. At the beginning, Ning Chui was worried that she wouldn't be able to bear it, so she kept controlling her strength. But after discovering the secret of this warm soup pool, he no longer had any scruples and truly transformed into a ferocious beast. But Ling Chu also had to admit that with the help of this warm soup, they were indeed very compatible. Regarding this matter, not only Ning Chui knew the taste, but even she couldn't stop. Seeing that Ning Chui was still staring at the water, Ling Chu picked up 2 pieces of jade and said, "Let's go, I'm hungry." Wen Tamchi couldn't be taken away, and it was too far away from Kyoto. Ning Chui had to give up and could only think of finding opportunities to bring Ling Chu over in the future. Bent down and picked up Ling Chu. "Let's go, I'll take you back to the cave first, and then I'll catch some pheasants and roast them." Knowing that Ling Chu liked this place, Ning Chui didn't plan to hunt here. Anyway, there were a lot of prey in front of the cave. Although Ling Chu was hungry, the warm soup was very therapeutic, so he didn't feel tired at all. But when Ning Chui hugged her, she didn't refuse. After returning to the cave along the same route, Ning Chui asked Ling Chu to stay and rest while he went out to hunt. The poison of love has been lifted from the 2 of them, and it's time for them to leave here. When Ning Chui came back, he carried 7 or 8 rabbits and pheasants. To Ling Chu's surprise, he was followed by the long-tailed monkey who hit her with jade. "Isn't this monkey afraid of you? Why did it follow you back?" I don't know if she understood Ling Chu's words, but the long-tailed monkey bared its teeth at her and screamed strangely. However, when Ning Chui passed by with a cold look, it immediately became quiet. After skewering the pheasants and rabbits and roasting them on the fire, Ning Chui took out a fist-sized stone and handed it to Ling Chu. "It's also jade." Seeing the exposed red, Ling Chu glanced at the listless long-tailed monkey, and then looked at Ning Chui. "Is this what it's using to hit you?" Ning Chui nodded. He was hunting outside just now, and the long-tailed monkey came to him for some reason, and it smashed him when it saw it. Fortunately, he was very vigilant and instead of being hit, he hit the monkey with a branch. For the sake of those 3 pieces of jade, Ning Chui didn't kill it. He just wanted to scare it away. Unexpectedly, the monkey was hit in the leg by him. Instead of running away, it followed him back. Ling Chu also felt strange. They had never seen this long-tailed monkey before, so naturally they could not offend it. But it hit them with emeralds again and again, because they had displeased it. Could it be that it thought the hot spring pool was its own and saw us taking a bath, so it wanted to hit us? Ling Chu thought about it, and there was only one reason. Unexpectedly, the long-tailed monkey actually bared its teeth at her. Ling Chu was a little bit dumbfounded. "I'm so angry. It seems I guessed it right." Ning Chui glanced at the long-tailed monkey, and it immediately calmed down. That warm soup pool can heal injuries. This long-tailed monkey is so smart. It seems that he was injured before and was accidentally cured by the water in the pool, so he regarded it as his own. Ning Chui didn't notice the monkey. The hot spring had many benefits. If he couldn't take it away, he would have it for himself. Ling Chu and Ning Chui had done so much strenuous exercise and were already starving. Seeing that the pheasant and rabbit have been roasted, start eating immediately. Smelling the strong fragrance, the long-tailed monkey scratched its ears and cheeks and screamed. If it weren't for the murderous aura in Ning Chui's body, it would have snatched it away. Ling Chu saw it looking longingly at the rabbit roasted on the wooden shelf, and his thoughts changed. but she didn't even give the long-tailed monkey a bite of meat. It wasn't until she slowly finished chewing a chicken leg that she cut a rabbit leg with Ning Chui's dagger. Swish it in front of the long-tailed monkey. Seeing that it had attracted attention and looked over eagerly, Ling Chu smiled and asked, "Want to eat?" The long-tailed monkey glanced at her and nodded vigorously. As soon as he stretched out his hand, he wanted to the meat away. Unexpectedly, Ling Chu quickly retracted his hand. Ning Chui was a little surprised when he saw Ling Chu's intention. But he knew that jadeite was good for Ling Chu's health, so he naturally wouldn't stop it, and even cooperated with him by releasing a murderous aura to scare the long-tailed monkey. Ling Chu refused to give it meat, and the long-tailed monkey jumped in haste. It was obvious that Ning Chui looked at it with a murderous look on his face, and he really didn't dare to do anything. Ling Chu pointed to the 3 pieces of jade at his feet and said, "If you want to eat meat, you can bring something like this in exchange." Even though he knew that the long-tailed monkey was smart, it was still wild, and Ling Chu was not sure whether it could understand human speech. With the attitude of giving it a try, I didn't expect that the monkey really understood it. He glanced at the rabbit leg in Ling Chu's hand, turned around and ran away. After about half a cup of tea, he came back and handed the 2 stones in his hand to Ling Chu. Although it is not big, judging from the exposed areas, it is indeed full of jadeite. Ling Chu was very happy and did not break his promise, so he gave the rabbit leg to the long-tailed monkey. After it finished eating, it was still staring at the remaining half of the rabbit with unsatisfied expression. Ling Chu continued to seduce, "If you take us to find these stones, I will give you this rabbit to eat." Although long-tailed monkeys like those shiny emeralds, they are animals after all. Those stones that cannot be eaten or drunk are not as attractive as the fragrant rabbit meat. After hearing Ling Chu's words, he couldn't wait to nod his head. The rabbit was given to the long-tailed monkey, and Ling Chu and Ning Chui followed it away. It had not been long since the long-tailed monkey went back to get the jade, so the 2 of them guessed that the place it wanted to take them to was not far away. But they didn't expect that the place the long-tailed monkeys would take them to was like the spectacular Huaguo mountain in TV movies. Fortunately, I saw that they were brought by the white-faced long-tailed monkey. The monkeys did not attack them, but followed them curiously. The long-tailed monkey was eager to eat rabbit meat and kept on taking Ling Chu and Ning Chui to a water curtain cave. Ling Chu was simply stunned when he saw the mountains of jade inside. End of chapter.